Hello, I'm Jenny, and I'd like to welcome you to our online soul space again. Today is the first of 4 sessions where we're going to be looking at the book of Ruth in the Bible. It's an Old Testament book, and in the Bible there are various different kinds of writing, and Ruth is a narrative. It's a story told in 4 chapters. At a simple level, it's a story about 2 widows who are trying to find their way through a difficult world where there's poverty, displacement and exclusion. At a deeper level, we're looking at a story of self-giving love and loyalty and faithfulness. And a story which, like all of the Old Testament, ultimately points forward to the coming of Jesus. But I'm running ahead. Today we're going to look at chapter 1. And after some songs, we will see how the story begins to unfold.
All these pieces, broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed, but not forsaken. I've been set free, I've been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found.
If you feel that you're a bit of an outsider, or not very religious, or you're just very ordinary and not very useful to God, or that your life is upside down, or empty, or hopeless, or just doesn't amount to much, then the story of Ruth is for you. She's a widowed, impoverished, despised woman, an inconsequential outsider whose life proves to be essential to the bigger picture of God's story. Her story makes it possible for each of us to understand that however insignificant we think we are vital in God's story. We count, and everything we do counts. So today, focusing on chapter 1, we're going to be having a go at putting ourselves in the shoes of the characters in this part of the story. So as you listen to it being read, you might like to be thinking about which character you feel drawn to and which one you'll choose. There are 3. They're all women. There's Orpah, Ruth and Naomi. They all have weighty decisions to make, and their futures are very uncertain.
Once upon a time, it was back in the days when the judges led Israel, there was a famine in the land. A man from Bethlehem in Judah left home to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, his sons were named Mahlon and Chilion, all Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They all went to the country of Moab and settled there. Elimelech died, and Naomi was left, she and her 2 sons. The sons took Moabite wives. The names of the first was Orpah, the second Ruth. They lived there in Moab for the next 10 years. But then the 2 brothers, Mahlon and Chilion, died. Now the woman was left without either her young men or her husband. One day she got herself together, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, to leave the country of Moab and set out for home. She had heard that God had been pleased to visit his people and give them food, and so she started out from the place she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, on the road back to the land of Judah. After a while on the road, Naomi took her 2 daughters-in-law and told them,
Go back, go home and live with your mothers, and may God treat you as graciously as you treated your deceased husbands and me. May God give each of you a new home and a new husband.
She kissed them and they cried openly. They said,
No, we're going on with you to your people.
but Naomi was firm.
Go back, my dear daughters. Why would you come with me? Do you suppose I still have sons in my womb who can become your future husbands? Go back, dear daughters, on your way, please. I'm too old to get a husband. Why, even if I said there's still hope, and this very night got a man and had sons, can you imagine being satisfied to wait until they were grown? Would you wait that long to get married again? No, dear daughters, this is a bitter pill for me to swallow. More bitter for me than for you. God has dealt me a hard blow.
Again they cried openly. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth embraced her and held on. And Naomi said,
Look, your sister-in-law is going back home to live with her own people and God's. Go with her.
But Ruth said,
Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. And where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die. And that's where I'll be buried. So help me God, Not even death itself is going to come between us.
When Naomi saw that Ruth had her heart set on going with her, she gave in, and so the two of them travelled on together to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was soon buzzing.
Is this really our Naomi? And after all this time?
But she said,
Don't call me Naomi. Call me bitter. The strong one has dealt me a bitter blow. I left here full of life, and God has brought me back with nothing but the clothes on my back. Why would you call me Naomi? God certainly doesn't. The strong one ruined me.
and so Naomi was back, and Ruth the foreigner with her, back from the country of Moab. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest.
Now, if you enjoy using your imagination, you might want to pick the more overlooked character, Orpah. Or, if like me, you find imagining things a bit of a challenge, or just an unfamiliar way of doing things, you might prefer to choose Naomi, for whom there are far more clues. Each of us will probably imagine things differently, and that's quite okay. Don't be worried about whether your imaginings are accurate. Just relax and see where your mind and God take you. So first we'll ask for God's help. Please God, would you help us now to focus our minds on the story? Would you open it up for us and help us to get inside it? So please choose your character if you haven't already done so, and then read through the chapter as it appears on the screen and think about the scene and the part that your character plays in it. As we now try to see things through our character's eyes, perhaps you might like to close yours. Picture the scene. The 3 bereaved women have been packing up their home of 10 years. You have been packing up your few belongings, only what you can carry. You're about to travel on foot to Bethlehem, about 50 miles, probably a 7 to 10 day journey, and you hope that at the end of it there will be food. The future, though, is altogether uncertain. How will you provide for yourself? You no longer have the protection of a husband. Naomi, Bethlehem is your hometown. Do you think people will remember you and be pleased to see you? But Ruth and Orpah, you'll be foreigners there. A different race, a different religion. You'll be viewed as unclean because of the origins of your race. You'll be excluded from society. No possibility of finding husbands. How will you make a life there? You start out on your journey, saying goodbye to your home. What can you see around you? Or are there tears in your eyes? What's the weather like? And the temperature? And the terrain? Do your feet hurt? Will you be able to find water? Are you afraid? 3 women travelling alone. And how do you feel about life in Bethlehem? Does staying in Moab, despite the famine, have its attractions? What might your future hold? And how do you feel about the lot life has dealt you? Do you have any reason to hope? Might your God help you? A little way into the journey, Naomi stops and turns to Ruth and Orpah and tells them to turn around and go back to their parental homes. Naomi, why this seemingly sudden decision? Orpah, you do as Naomi asks, but didn't you want to go to Bethlehem to find food? Ruth, what makes you go against your mother-in-law's wishes? Kindness? Loyalty? Self-interest? Your journey is finally over. Naomi, are you pleased to be home again? Why do you say that people should call you Mara, bitter? Orpah, what did your mother and father say when you told them you were home to stay? How do you feel about being back under their roof again? Ruth, what are your first impressions? How are you feeling about living here? Are you having any doubts about your decision to stay with Naomi? If you're watching this video with someone, you might like to pause it and talk about what you imagined and how your character felt. Anything particular or unexpected that you noticed? And whether you enjoyed the experience or not.
Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. Breathe on me, breath of God, until my heart is pure, until with thee I will one will to do and to endure. Breathe on me, breath of God, till
telling you a story, and I began by saying, in the days of the Second World War, you would immediately have a sense of the time that I'm talking about. And that's because we have a shared cultural history, even though very, very few of us now were around at that time. We immediately would recognise the general setting of the story, wouldn't we? Now, Ruth chapter 1 begins, in the days that judges ruled Israel, which for us doesn't conjure up a setting, does it? But it did for the Jews who listened to that story or read that story even a couple of hundred, probably more years than that, after it was written. Because they, like us, had a shared cultural history. Now, without going into lots of detail, the days the judges ruled Israel were actually days of considerable moral and spiritual decline in Israel. They were not easy times to live in. And we begin with this family. Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Kilian, and who, when famine struck Israel, specifically Bethlehem, where they lived, they decided to actually move away to where they could get more food, and they decided to move to a place called Moab. Now, you can tell how utterly desperate this family was to move, because the Moabites had a really bad relationship with Israel. The Moabites were actually descended from Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. And if you probably remember Lot, the story of Lot, who, when they were leaving their city because of judgment on it, his wife, they were all told, don't turn around, and his wife turned around and was turned into a pillar of salt. Anyway, after this, it's said that Lot had an incestuous relationship with his daughter, and from this relationship, the nation of the Moabites was descended. There was so much bad feeling between Israel and Moab. The Moabites were known to be idol worshippers, something which was completely forbidden to the Israelites. And there have been lots of trouble and fighting and dispute between them. To get a sense of how much they hated each other, think of the modern day relationship between Palestine and Israel, and you get a sense of that ongoing conflict and dislike and trouble, that sense of total distrust. So actually, this family moving to Moab was quite a big deal. But nevertheless, they chose to do it, and they settled there for a while, and the two sons married Moabite women called Orpah and Ruth. And then we read in our passage that all three women, Naomi and Orpah and Ruth, were widowed. And Naomi makes the decision to go home to Israel. She's a widow, she feels all alone, and the famine is over. So she wants to go home to Bethlehem. Now let's think about Orpah and Ruth. We've read about them, haven't we? And thought about them as well. As Moabite women, surely it was a pretty unwise decision to even consider moving to Israel with Naomi, because they could only have expected a very hostile reception. What possible good future could there be for them? The normal practice for a young widow, in fact it was the law, was that you would marry your husband's brother. But of course, both brothers were dead. The purpose of this law, it was called the Levirate law, and the purpose was to carry on the family name. But as Naomi points out, that's not going to work here, because she said, am I going to have more sons? And even if I do, really are you going to wait around for them to grow up and be old enough to get married and have children with you, carry on the family name? It's not going to work, is it? So all these circumstances make it really hard to criticise Orpah for making the decision she did to head back to Moab, to her own people and her own family. Orpah made a very sensible and pragmatic decision. Much more puzzling is Ruth's arguably reckless decision to carry on with Naomi to Bethlehem. Because at the risk of labouring the point, the Israelites hated the Moabites, and she was a woman, and it's not good to be a woman alone in a hostile place. There's no possible future she could look forward to. What was she thinking? Well, let's see. Verse 14 tells us that she embraced Naomi and held on. Quite a lot of translations don't say embraced and held on. They say clung to Naomi. And interestingly, the same Hebrew verb is used in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, to describe how a husband and wife become united in marriage. It's about an absolute unbreakable bond of commitment. And so for Ruth to cling to Naomi so hard and firmly indicates her utter commitment and love for her mother-in-law. She sees herself as bound to her in the closest possible union there could be. In verse 16 and 17, some of that I'll quote. She says, "Don't make me go home. Where you go, I will go. Your people are my people." So she is taking a massive step. She is renouncing her own people of Moab, and she is choosing Israel in spite of not really knowing the reception she might get. And really crucial in these two verses is the line, "Your God is my God." Now we can only assume from that Naomi must have given Ruth an incredible witness about Israel's God. And that Ruth's faith in this God, because of course in Moab they worshipped idols, they perhaps had multiple gods, but Ruth's faith in Israel's God has grown. It's found a home in her, and it's complete and grown deep. Now, given these moving words, to which of course Naomi eventually does give in and say, whilst she doesn't argue anymore, they just set off together towards Israel. Given that, the reader is given a sort of jolt to hear Naomi lament when they get to Bethlehem. She's welcomed home. Everybody said, "Oh my goodness, it's Naomi. I can't believe she's home." And it's a proper, really big welcome. But she laments, she cries out. Now she has, of course, been through a huge trauma. Her husband is dead. Her 2 sons are dead. That's a trauma, that's reason to lament. But she says she's returned with nothing but the clothes on my back. And my first reaction to this was, yes, that's true, but you have a wonderful, committed daughter-in-law So it doesn't seem right to say, I've nothing. She seems she's got something to be thankful for. But actually my reaction there misses the point about an important quality of God. Naomi laments, which is a biblical tradition. We see other laments in the Bible. She is welcomed in Bethlehem, but her response is in verse 20 and 21. She said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Mara means bitter. "The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has inflicted pain on me." Now, Naomi here is painfully, achingly honest about her pain. And she has that honesty because with God, she can be painfully honest. She hasn't rejected God. She's come home to Bethlehem. She's come home to her people. She still is loyal to God. She's been welcomed back, but she is lamenting about what she says God has done to her. Now, it's quite possible that the townspeople who have welcomed her back feel a bit uncomfortable when she talks like this. It's possible that Ruth might have felt a little bit uncomfortable too. But Naomi acknowledged and trusted God so much that she could cry out and lament and complain. She could be completely authentic before God. She totally trusted him enough to do that she wouldn't be rejected, that she would be heard. So what could we take away from the first chapter of the story of Ruth? Sometimes with stories, it's quite hard to find something to apply in our modern day lives. Not like, say, in the teachings of Jesus, or in the writings, in the other writings in the New Testament, where there is sometimes a specific lesson there that we can take for our own lives. But there is actually quite a lot in this short chapter. Like the family here, we don't get to choose the times that we live in or the painful events of life. Indeed, we are living in the days of COVID-19. What decisions do we make in particular circumstances? Orpah's decision, as we've seen, was pragmatic and sensible to deal with her own situation. It was the safe option. And I confess that I tend to be very risk averse, and I tend to choose the safe, pragmatic option and avoid anything that's a little bit scary. But Ruth's decision to go with Naomi to Bethlehem was based on something more profound. It was based on loyalty. It was based on trust in the God she had come to know. It wasn't a safe or sensible option at all. How do we respond to our circumstances? Do we respond sensibly, like Orpah, or do we respond like Ruth, following whatever calling we hear, which is anything but sensible? Now, in the crisis we currently have, please don't put yourself in any danger when it comes to this virus. But is God calling you to a role, an action, a path at this time? An action or a role that doesn't feel very safe or sensible? Naomi, we've learned, was a great witness to her God. And is there someone in your life from whom you would like to hear the words, "My God is your God"? What can you do to enable this to happen? And the third thing, as we've seen, Naomi lamented. God never asks us to pretend that everything is just fine, because it's not fine, is it? In the UK alone, well over 40,000 people are dead from COVID-19. That's not fine at all. Naomi teaches us that it's okay to share our pain, our anger with God. It's okay to lament and say, why? Why are you doing this? Please stop this. Why? Why have you done this to us? It hurts. These times hurt, and we don't have to use our faith to pretend that it doesn't. Now, of course, the story of Ruth is not over yet. That was chapter 1, and there is plenty more in store for Ruth and Naomi. So I really hope that you'll be able to join us as we explore where the story goes next. Amen.
Hello, I'm Jill. I bring you these prayers from the garden as a reminder of the world beyond our doors, and in a moment from the kitchen, the place where we are fed. In the garden, we will focus on these flowers, fragile things, and in the kitchen, on a loaf of bread. There'll be a pause after each section of the prayer where you can make the prayer specific to your concerns, or just sit quietly, knowing you are bathed in the presence of God. We pray. Here we are, Lord, hearing your story and bringing to mind the world in which we live, beset by humanity's failure to live with respect for each other and for all creation, fraught with fear, injustice and violence at a scale which can overwhelm us. We pass to you events and circumstances beyond our control. We offer to you our mixed up world. Here we are, Lord, listening to your story, conscious of your presence, with Naomi's torn apart family and her survival in a harsh world. We know the world can still be harsh. We are in the presence of a God we can call Father. And today we remember fathers in human families. One's blessed with joy at this moment, one's weighted by burdens at this moment. Families like Naomi's, those torn apart, fluid families reformed. And we remember today our companions on life's path. Here we are, Lord, knowing that your love surrounds us all. We give thanks for workers who daily show their loving kindness in their work. We give thanks for activists willing to put themselves in danger to shine a light on injustice. We remember someone who has shown loving kindness to us, and we name them now with thanks. Here we are, Lord, offering you our story, all we have lived to this point, all we can be from this moment. When we feel our small actions are insignificant, remind us of Ruth. Give us the insight and courage of Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth when faced with decision. Open us up to be the one who shows loving kindness in our living each day. We name now something we can do for someone to show loving kindness this week. Here we are, Lord, bathed in your presence, receiving your blessing today. Amen.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Lord, be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best Lord, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom, be thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, and I thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Be thou my shield and my sword for the fight. Be thou my dignity, be thou my might. Thou my sole shelter, and thou my high tower. Raise thou me heavenward, the bar of my path. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, be first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, where victory is won, may I reach thence joys of bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, a ruler of all. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, a ruler of all.
I'm Peter, and I hope you have enjoyed the latest of our Soul Space services. The next video will be available on Sunday the 5th of July, and we shall be continuing our explorations of the Book of Ruth. you might like to read chapter 2 in advance and learn about Ruth and Naomi's experiences on arrival in Bethlehem, where they have no societal protection, and Ruth is of course a foreign immigrant, and we shall be looking at issues of offering welcome and providing refuge. You may like to join our Facebook group too, where the links to our previous videos are available, together with our songs. The link is displayed, and it's also on the YouTube information panel. Until then, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our company. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.